Good morning, noon. Thank you for joining me. And today I want to talk about removing the veils. So I'm sorry I had to switch the time of my live stream to 1 o'clock. I had an appointment that I forgot about that I had to switch around. So in general, I'm trying to keep these at noon on Fridays. So I'm going to put it on my calendar to not schedule other things on top of it. So I feel like the past couple of days, my awareness has been rather focused on what's going on politically in the United States. I know not all of you are in the US, but what's been going on with the Supreme Court justice hearings. And it's difficult to not pay attention to that, obviously. And in general, with my yoga teachings, I try to remain as neutral politically as I can, because I think these teachings are for everybody, and regardless of what your party affiliation is. But I will say that at this point in time, it feels very difficult for me to focus on the teachings alone, and without talking about politics. And so I'm not going to get into anything deep about politics. What I am going to talk about is what this idea of removing the veils and what it has to do with consciousness raising. And what the tradition says about it, and how it's applicable to our lives personally and collectively. Because one of the things that I feel strongly about with yoga is that it helps us to change ourselves personally, and it helps us to be the best person we can be in community and throughout the social ecological spheres, I would say. So the social ecological model is a model that comes from systems theory that talks about how individuals don't exist just as islands, but we're individuals and families and communities and cultures and the greater universe, and that all of those things are influencing who we are as individuals, and we in turn vibrate out into all of those other areas. So we're constantly influencing other people, and things from outside are also constantly influencing us, because everything is interconnected and interdependent. And that's just the law of the universe. Doesn't even require a belief system to understand interconnectivity, and interdependency, and how these are really the rule of life, and yoga can help us to remove the veils from the ignorance of ego, from the ignorance that we are isolated, and to see the bigger picture. And in fact, I think that's one of the most powerful things that the practice can do. So this morning I was sitting at the breakfast table with my husband, and telling him how watching what transpired yesterday, and I spent some time watching the Judiciary Committee hearings yesterday from both sides, and I'm in no position to make any judgment about who is lying and who's telling the truth, or who has compartmentalized parts of their lives and forgotten things that may have happened or didn't happen. That's not the position. But what is fascinating to me is the veils that through this process and through the whole Me Too movement, really, personally, the veils that I've seen lifted from my awareness personally. The sexual assaults that I've faced as just a woman in this culture that every woman has faced. Once I was, just all sorts of things. Everybody in high school, people would, boys would grab your butt, and that was supposed to be okay. It meant they liked you, and you let them happen. And to the messages I got as a Catholic school girl, which were basically, it was my responsibility to take care of the sexual urges of boys. And the way that I took care of that was by not dressing provocatively and being on the lookout all the time, that I could be in those positions. I could put myself in those positions. So the idea was, don't put yourself in those positions because boys can't control themselves. And I think, so thinking back of the, and I went to Georgetown University, so I knew people from Georgetown Prep who then ended up at Georgetown University. I knew women who grew up around Georgetown who went to Georgetown University, who were probably at those parties that were talked about in the committee hearings. And I remember that time very vividly. I'm the same age as Brett Kavanaugh and Professor Ford. So like same peer group, and so I remember those times very vividly, and I remember the burden that I felt to stay safe, and how that was an illusion, a veil or an illusion that was my responsibility. What Patanjali says is that there are kleshas that cover our, they color our minds. Essentially, there are things that block our awareness and they color our minds. And to get rid of those colorings, the practice that he recommends is Kriya Yoga, right? Tapas Swadhyaya Shvara Pranidhanani, which is tapas, the sacrifice, the swadhyaya, the self-study, and Ishvara Pranidhana, accepting support from something higher. So Patanjali suggests that there are these 3 ways to remove the coloring. And so as I'm thinking about these, these veils of illusions being lifted, I'm talking to my husband at the breakfast table about just relaying things that I never considered to be sexual assault, like having some man that I was massaging at a bicycle race ejaculate on my massage table. They think things that I just was like, oh, well, some people are disgusting or whatever. Like things I never considered to be sexual assault, and starting to see like, whoa, this whole process has just opened my eyes to illusions that I feel like I was so, that were coloring my mind, And I think collectively that's what's happening too, that we're awakening to the fact that life doesn't have to be like this. I should not have to feel unsafe. One of the things that happened to me was when I was 26, 25 years old, I moved to Japan. I lived there for 2 years. And I never felt so safe in my life as when I lived in Japan. Like people don't have weapons and there's not an aggressive feeling. And not saying that that's a perfect culture, but it changed. That was a veil removing experience for me. And this past couple of days has been a real veil removing experience for me. And I hope culturally that is also I think that's what's happening. You can't stop the juggernaut of consciousness. You can't stop consciousness. You can keep trying to wind things back and go to regressive policies and go and try and put people back in their place, but you can't stop consciousness because it will burst through any living organism. It's the nature of consciousness. And so consciousness is pushing forward and calling us to wake up. And, if even regardless whether or not Kavanaugh is guilty or not, if he had had the dignity to stand down and say, obviously this proceeding is causing so much challenge, so much pain, and the dignity to just step down and say, I'm not going to stay, like give this position to a woman so that women can feel that they're valued and they really understand that people are out there fighting against these sorts of atrocities. If that had happened, he can go coach girls basketball all he wants, but being a Supreme Court judge is a completely different responsibility. And even if he was not guilty, for him to step down and say, I can't accept this because I see the pain that it's caused, would have been a much more dignified and a much more authentic, he could say, as a child, I probably made a lot of mistakes. I didn't have much front brain, to at least go to a place where you have some sense of humility instead of you're being punished by not being given, by being called to question for this. So at least that would give us the opportunity to say, okay, this guy has some dignity and he has a soul, And for me to see that the veils have lifted so much for so many people, personally, collectively, is in many ways, it's a vindication. And it feels very, I don't know why, but it feels very personal to me. It feels very personal. It feels very, probably because I'm sure I know some of the, I'm in the same peer group, and I've seen the evolution of what's happened in 30 years. And for me, a big part of my awakening as a feminist, as a woman just coming into my own power, has been these practices of yoga that have opened my eyes to so much injustice in the world, personally and collectively. And so I don't like to, I'm very uncomfortable talking about these things in public. I don't like to talk about these things in classes. I don't want to ostracize anyone or make them feel, because we have different political opinions, that they don't belong, or I never want to do that to anybody in my classes. And yet at the same time, this incident has made me think very deeply about what it means to be committed to awakening, what it means to be committed to removing the veils, personally and in terms of our culture and culturally, and the fact that these practices are designed to do just that, and help us to continue to wake up, because awakening is not a one-time deal. It's a lifelong process. So I hope this is helpful and in some way. And if it's been offensive to you, I apologize. It's not my intention. But it was something that I felt very personally connected to, and I wanted to take a few moments to talk about it. So with that being said, I'll be back here next week, and feel free to leave comments and questions, and in the spirit of our interconnectedness, and the spirit of moving towards unity. It doesn't mean we have to agree with each other all the time, but moving in the direction of unity. I simply offer this idea that the practices, that consciousness can't be stopped, and that the practices are a way for us to co-create or co-participate into that awakening process. Namaste.